Okay. All right. Well, it is time for our Facebook Live event. Just make sure I close my. Just wanted to close my phone so I don't get a phone call in the middle of this. Here we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. This is Greg Ayotte, Director of Consumer Services with the Brain Injury Association of America, along here with Heather. Heather, introduce yourself.
I'm Heather Matty. I'm the Information and Resource Specialist with the Brain Injury Association.
So we are the folks that respond to the requests that come in through the Brain Injury Association of America's 800 line or the website, etc. And we've been doing these kind of Ask NBIC events over the course of the year. And the theme of this Ask NBIC event, NBIC, National Brain Injury Information Center, sorry, don't want to use the lingo, National Brain Injury Information Center. Um, the theme for this Ask NBIC was around building a community. And we've had some of our members of a survivor council come and do Facebook Live around the same issue. But this is a common question that we get, and it's an easy question, and it's a hard question. So we thought we'd kind of approach this kind of going from the time of injury forward. There's no right away, but it felt like this kind of made the most sense for us to do it. So early on after the injury, I think so I'll back up and say when we're talking about building a community, we're kind of going to toggle back and forth both between caregivers and survivors. And so because we get a lot of calls early after the injury from families and caregivers trying to wrap their heads around what has happened, trying to understand what might happen next, trying to get some sense of control over what they can do to be helpful and be supportive. And in those instances, the importance of some type of community, some type of support becomes very important. And that can take shape in many different ways, where it could just be that community is finding two or three professionals that you can just bounce ideas off of, talk to out loud, just trying to talk through what things might be. It also might be finding support groups that either like maybe meet in the hospital or in the community and talking to other family members who either are dealing or have dealt with similar situations that you're dealing. Just hearing the experiences of others can make help the family member feel a little less isolated. That's another kind of common thing we hear. They feel like the world's crashing around them and they don't know where to turn. And so talking to others who have been where you're at can be a huge way of supporting somebody and just kind of helping them understand there's help along the way. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So there's that part of it. So the building a community early is really just about trying to understand the injury, trying to understand the systems that you're working in, trying to understand the things that you can do to kind of help yourself and help your loved one. We thought that was important to talk about and note. So obviously reaching out to NBIC, the Brain Injury Association of America, we have information about support groups that meet different states. And I think the other thing we'll talk about this about for later groups too, but when folks think about a support group, I think at least in my head, I think you have this traditional idea of in person, kind of sitting in a circle and kind of sharing experiences. But there's many different shapes and sizes to support groups. Kind of how they function, how they meet. We are seeing more and more online groups or a hybrid group, like so sometimes meet in person and or do it online as well. So there's a whole kind of range of opportunity to kind of connect with others. Um, and what we usually tell folks when they contact us is you find the group that works for you. And so what may work for one may not work for another. For some folks, the idea of going to a group, physically going to a group after they've been talking to doctors and trying to figure out next steps is just exhausting. And so just being able to sit in your own home in comfy clothes and just jump on an online group, maybe that's what you can do. So it's the idea of trying to figure out what works for you. Did I skip anything, Heath? Is that
No, no.
okay?
And
Go
part
ahead.
of the support groups too is some of the there in some states and some support groups actually have seminars for families and caregivers as well
Mhm.
that have different topics, and it's a time to network with other caregivers and survivors and learn different resources as well. And that's also another good thing. Some of
Yeah,
the support groups have themselves, some affiliates have them. It's just different in each state.
yeah. So reach out to us, reach out to your state office, find out what is available. I want to shift a little further down the line and talk about kind of building that community a little later post injury. So this is where the support and community for the person with the injury and the caregivers kind of come into play. And so we get this call fairly frequently from folks who have sustained an injury and are now kind of back home. And after you leave rehabilitation, if you've been to rehabilitation, you can kind of feel isolated. You can kind of feel like, well, now I'm back in the world, but I'm not back in the world. I don't, no one's given me a clear roadmap of what to do. No one's told me what I can or should be looking for. It's up to me to figure it out, and I don't know if I know how to figure it out. And so the importance of community kind of earlier in that kind of recovery process can be helpful. And again, we'll go back to the idea of that support group, kind of talking with other survivors who have kind of been where you're at, um, can be extremely helpful. Uh, just from talking to folks who have contacted us, it helps them feel less isolated, less alone. It gives them some idea of what might happen next. I think that's the caveat I always say. Like, you might hear someone else's story, but your story, maybe 60% the same, but there might be 40% different. So you have to realize whatever you're hearing won't be exactly what to expect, but at least gives you some semblance, some feeling of what might occur. So early on, connecting with others who've kind of been where you're at can make a big difference. I know, Heather, this is something that you wanted to talk about, the importance of that support group of survivors early on.
Hmm. With survivors, ear early on, it's usually you're still in the phase where you're still trying to accept things and learn different things, and sometimes it's going to going to the support groups is important for you as well to learn to meet other people, just to have that support and not feeling alone. And for some people, like Greg said, it's doing it online or going in person, and shopping around sometimes is necessary
Mm,
too, because for caregivers and survivors, there may be a group and you just don't feel like you fit in. And sometimes it's good to go a couple times to see, just to get your foot in to see. And if that's not working, there's all other support groups. If you're finding the virtual works best for me, you can look at another virtual group, or you can try the in person. And the same thing with in person. If it's too stimulating or there's just too much, you can look at the virtual.
yeah,
But it's
yeah,
important in the beginning, like, to get the support and feel like you're not alone and with other people that understand.
And I'm going to flip the script a little bit for a minute too, and saying for the caregiver, going to a group as the kind of recovery continues can be helpful because there's no roadmap to what should I be pointing out everything they're doing wrong or not? Should I be setting up structure for every minute of the day or not? Should I be like, what should I be doing? And being able to talk through those things with someone else who's, again, been where you're at can be very helpful for not only kind of, I always tell folks that it's as important to avoid doing bad things as it is doing good, because each, the survivor and the caregiver, they're all just trying to figure out the roadmap for them. What's going to work for them? What's going to work for this family? What's going to work for this recovery? And each journey is different, right? Each story is different. So you can pick up really helpful nuggets and tidbits of info from others, but in the end, you've got to build your own story, build your own journey. And so talking to others is a huge part of that, but it doesn't give you all the answers. There's still work that you have to do as well.
And
I
with
would
the support groups, some of them are set up differently. Some of them are for
mm,
both caregiver and survivors. And I find a lot now are doing it together for a while,
and
and then
that's
they'll
good.
split the caregivers and the survivors
Yeah,
as separate. And some also have educational opportunities at the meetings.
yeah,
They're all very different.
yeah. I think that's why too, as you had mentioned, that's important to check out. Go to a couple of meetings for a meeting and find the one that works for you, right? You may find stuff that's more that traditional support group maybe isn't for you. Maybe you want the more educational based one, maybe you don't. And so that's that. Yeah, try different groups, try some different things, but the idea is you're trying to build that little community, that little network of support to kind of help guide you as the recovery continues. So I also want to, I'll add to that, um, kind of as a parallel to this too, that there's also some really helpful kind of online groups. So you may find like Facebook groups, or there's some nice forums, it's like online message boards specific to brain injury that are pretty active, have knowledgeable people involved in them. And so those can be helpful too, where it's a different type of support. That's not that interpersonal interactive support, right? So you post something and then you'll read something later, so it's a little different, but that can also be helpful too, where you can post something to, like any type of forum or a Facebook group. Obviously, you're posting it to a wider audience than just a support group, right? So there might be several hundred or several thousand folks involved in a group versus a support group might have 15, 20 people on average. So getting a little being able to ask a question to a wider group can be helpful, although it's not quite the same. But I said it's another kind of method of building that community is going and finding those online sources. Again, you can reach out to us. We have some um, ideas, certainly talking to folks in this support groups of where else that they have found to be helpful can be useful. But I don't want people to think that the community can only be built through support groups like in person or online. There's other avenues, especially relatively early on in the recovery, right? As you're still trying to kind of figure it out. But then we want to get to,
The
so
peer
that's the,
support.
yeah, so that's the other, so the next kind of part of that, right, is the peer support. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the peer support, there's two different forms of it. Like a lot of the Center for Independent Living, each state has several in the area you are. Peer support is a big thing with the Centers for Independent Living. They have one-on-one peer support, and they also have groups um, during the day for peer support. And for some people, they need peer support from others that have been through it. And for other people, when they're further in, they want to use what they've been through to support others. and a lot of those programs always are in need of persons with brain injury for the peer support. And it's very helpful for some people. It's like using what you've been through to help others, and that's been a big thing for people, and also getting the support from other people. And that's and a lot of times they may have trainings for them, or we've had people call the CILs and said, "Hey, if someone needs to talk, you can call me." So there's different forms of it, or they have a formal training on peer support.
It's a good. I think it's really, yeah. I really am a big fan of folks using the independent living centers as a resource where they may not have something specific for brain injury, but they may have
Mhm,
something about, menu planning or budgeting, or like it's
mhm,
still a skill set, and they have folks who know how to teach it to people who may struggle with learning it, right? So it's not like a regular, class. So
right.
they kind of are at a little more, obviously a little smaller class, usually a little more opportunity for one-on-one instruction as well as group. But that can be a huge help with just kind of, again, kind of, building your journey, trying to figure out what's going to be helpful. And as you mentioned too, kind of that next phase, as you kind of continue the recoveries, you look to pay it forward, right? You look to, how can I, and I've done all of this work and I've gotten to this point where I feel like I've got a foundation. I've figured out some things that work for me. What can I do to maybe help others? And that independent living centers can be a great opportunity to kind of not only learn some things, but also potentially kind of pay it forward to others as well.
Because part of that is like with the peer support, and like Greg was saying, they have independent living skills training with classes, and sometimes that's helpful for people with brain injury, relearning different things and getting the support of other people. And a lot of people have found that helpful.
Yeah. So they're more prevalent because there's another resource, not quite the same as that, but there are some brain injury clubhouses out there as well. Not as many as the independent living centers, and they certainly have a little different structure than independent living centers. But sometimes brain injury clubhouses can be helpful too for those are folks that are, um, looking to kind of continue their recovery. And it's not a rehab program, so it's much more of a kind of a community gathering, but they, as a group, kind of run that clubhouse together
Yes.
and kind of decide what are the things, events we're going to do, how are we going to plan this, how are we going to budget for this, how are we going to, and so being able to work with the group, kind of doing that can be really helpful. And in talking to a lot of the different clubhouses around the country, they're so different
Hmm.
on kind of the activities they do, how they kind of approach it. But I mean, part of it is, what's available near where they are and what's of interest to the group that's participating. So that too can be if there is a brain injury clubhouse anywhere nearby, that can be another tool to kind of build that community as well.
And for some people, those clubhouses and some of the centers for independent living have pre-vocational training where
Hmm.
they have classes and stuff for that type of thing. And for some people with brain injury, they found that very helpful just to, you know, like do some work there to try to see, what levels you are at. And I've known a lot of people have done that as well.
Yeah, that can be extremely helpful. So if you're at the point of either feeling like you have a decent foundation or maybe trying to pay it forward or pay it back, um, I and we talked about this, Heather, before we started. It was like one of the things we kind of encourage folks is, well, look beyond brain injury,
Hmm.
that you can find that community and support in other places, other avenues beyond just a brain injury support group or a brain injury clubhouse. Is that there could be opportunities within the community in general to volunteer, to help out, help others, and so that can allow you to kind of continue to feel connected to the community in a different kind of relationship, but still one that's positive in trying to kind of help others and continue that. In my mind too, it helps you just kind of continue to build skills, right? You're
Mhm.
still learning to help others and work with others and find those systems. And I know, have you had some ideas about some of the places people could look for those type of things?
Yeah, for like volunteer work, like a lot of the nonprofits um, are always looking for volunteers you can just call. I know someone that had a brain injury that volunteered at the zoo. Another person volunteered at a school. They just are, a lot of nonprofits are looking for volunteers all the time, and senior centers, especially in different places like that, that they just need. And it really, with a person with brain injury, doing the volunteer work really is helpful too. It's, relearning the skills or just being with other people, and that's been very helpful for people.
Yeah.
There's also volunteer match online where you can put in the county you're in and look for volunteers, or you can just, if there's something that interests you, you could call to see if they have any openings.
Yep. I can say there's a lot of like non-profit agencies that if you had called and said, "Hey, I really want to try to help out. Here are my skills. Here's what I could do." You'd be surprised at how often somebody like, we really could, maybe we could have some help with that. We have an event coming up. We have some thing that we really need help with, and so you never know how it will kind of play out. So it's always good to, if there's an area that you feel passionate about, right? Like, yeah, if you're really, enjoying, animals or singing or whatever it might be, like find those opportunities within the community to reach out and try to connect with as well, because building community is more than just finding other folks with brain injury. It's also can be finding other folks you or other interests, right? Other areas of interest and other places you're passionate about. So don't discount that as a way to kind of rebuild that community and connection.
And a lot of times churches have groups too, and for a lot of
Mhm.
people they may have different types of groups, and for some people that's really helpful too.
Yep, absolutely. You never quite know. So I think the other, I was trying to think. We forgot to talk about something. That was the other. So we talked about.
TBI advisory.
Thank you. Yes. Go ahead. Talk about that.
Um, a lot of states have something called the TBI Advisory Council that's for both survivors and caregivers. What it is each states have a type of TBI program, and they do everything from sharing, their thoughts and needs to help looking at a plan for the state and just giving your input, and that is so important. Um, and a lot of the states that's a key in getting with the needs assessment. They do needs
Yep.
assessments as well about what
Yep.
the needs are of people, and having the advisory council involved with that is very helpful.
Yep.
So it's very much encouraged for survivors and families to reach out to those.
So as an addition to that, so you have the state kind of, usually like a state brain injury advisory council, right, which has state agencies, caregivers, survivors, providers, kind of a whole spectrum of folks involved in the brain injury space. You also have other opportunities, independent living centers. Typically,
Hmm.
they have boards and they're looking for a range of experiences as well. Your disability rights center in your state, they usually have some type of advisory board, and they are looking for folks who also have a disability or have experience with it. So there's other potential opportunities out there to kind of get connected with a group, um, and be able to kind of give back and get connected with a group that's trying to kind of make things better in their
And
state.
a lot of nonprofits have advisory council too, and
Mhm.
like they look for people like what they have a lot for mental health. They have a lot for just just agencies that help with funding or whatever, and they're always looking for people too for the advisory councils.
So the other piece kind of to think about too is trying to build that community, trying to figure out where you fit. Um, I think you had talked about this the other day, Heather, was about the I'm blanking on one, like the
The class,
recreation counselors and
the a lot of counties have recreational programs, and a lot of them have classes. They have classes that are exercise. They have classes with arts. They have computer classes. There's all different types of classes. There's some of the parks, the recreation parks that
Mhm.
have walking and trail classes. They're just a different they all have different type of classes, and some provide scholarships if you can't afford the fee or it's already covered by your county. And for a
Mhm.
lot of people, that's been really helpful. I know a lot of people, art and music have been really good part of their recovery process too, and a lot of those have the art classes. There's some nonprofits that have art clubhouses as well. Um, and just taking the classes with other people in has been really helpful for people.
Definitely.
And
So,
then the community colleges also often
mhm,
have classes on different areas. Some of them have art classes, some of them have computer skills, some of them have baking and cooking and different things a lot. And it's just a lot of different people. And a lot of times, I mean, it's really great to go to a class with other people
yeah, I mean,
and
obviously,
relearn your interests because sometimes
yeah.
your interests change after an
I
injury.
took the words out
Like,
of my mouth. Yep.
and like, s- like before the injury, you were interested in doing art, but now it's difficult. So, doing some music or the total opposite. There's just different things, and you can take classes to see which ones that you know you like.
Yep. I think I'm old. I don't know if they still do this, but I know back in the day, you used to be able to audit
You
the
can,
community,
yes,
audit the class, right? You're not taking it for a grade, you're just
right,
going to audit. So it's a lot less expensive and you can go
yes.
and, participate in all of the classes, and that way you can try some things out and see if that, um, something piques your interest. But this idea of building the community after the brain injury can take a lot of different shapes and go a lot of different directions. 'Cause I think as the kind of person recovers after the injury and kind of trying to figure out where they fit back in the community, it's going to be important to try different avenues, right? Where do I fit? And so again, just like that we talked about with the support groups, might try different ones. You might have different activities that
Mhm,
you might try. Be like, well, maybe this will be it, and kind of give yourself the space to try it and decide if you like it, if you don't like it. But that can be a big part, I think, of the kind of the long lasting kind of recovery after the injury, as well as I'm a big fan of trying to figure out a way to pay it forward in
mhm,
some way, shape, or form. So certainly I don't want to say only do, bird watching and do nothing else. No, if you can do bird watching and maybe help with that support group that you were involved with before, maybe coming and doing a talk, or maybe just being there to help others along where you were at, that in and of itself can be helpful too. So a lot of different avenues for folks to do, kind of give back, to kind of build that sense of belonging and community and purpose again. So there's no one way to do it. There's no one way to do it. So, um, I know that too. We didn't mention it, but it just popped in my head. Was one of the things that we've seen more of is people kind of sharing their story online.
mhm,
So we've had more folks contact our office, kind of trying to share their story or trying to write a book,
mhm.
about it as well. But that's another part of that. I look at it as building a community because it's still trying to give back to others, trying to help others in some way, shape, or form. I'm just going to tell people it's a lot harder to write your story than you think.
Mhm.
So it's not a bad process to go through. I really feel like it can be a nice way to help kind of process your injury and recovery as you write through what happened and how you worked to get better. But it's not an easy process.
And sometimes we'll get calls from people because of where they are, there's no support groups in the area, and they wanna look at starting one. And that's
Hmm.
another way, and we have some books about starting a
Hmm.
support group and tips and things like that, and that's another way to get forward.
Yeah. So you never know what avenue it's going to take you. Um, but I think being open to new ideas will be helpful. Um, Listening to others without feeling like that's the only way to do it
Yes.
can be helpful. And then trying to figure out a way to pay it forward in some way, shape, or form, whatever worked for you. I think is also another kind of avenue for kind of building that community. Do we miss anything? Any other? So I didn't really have any. We had questions come in. We had sent out a request, but I mean, most of the questions, everyone who got a question, we'll send an email reply to. So we will reply to the folks if we didn't talk about your question specifically. Usually, it's probably because it's more involved than what we would be able to talk about here. Um, but one of the things that there were a couple of folks who wrote in kind of expressing their frustration with the lack of understanding about brain injury from other organizations, from other either government agencies or what have you, the lack of understanding of brain injury and
And
how
that's
do
a
you, how
way
do you
to
get out?
get forward too, is like there's fact sheets that we have and different things, educational materials on brain injury. And
Mm-hmm.
for some people, they like feel, educational, these people just sending out education materials to them or, asking to talk to someone at that agency or office to say, hey, these are the resources available for education. Would you guys be interested?
Yeah,
And that's been a lot of people have done that, and that's give them a fulfillment of feeling like they've, been able to feel like they've given given them more opportunities to learn, and that's been helpful for them.
yeah, I could definitely. That's one of those again where you're not quite sure what the response will be,
Mhm.
right? So will they be receptive to the info or not receptive? So I'm a big fan of trying to send info from organizations like us or the Model Systems Knowledge Translation Center or somewhere else that's going to give some research based info. So it's not just your experience. Well, when I called, this is what happened and this is what you should do. Like when you get that personal feedback just from your own experience, that tends to be like what people will think, oh, that's a one off. That does, they'll minimize the impact of it, which
And then,
happens.
yeah, and another for people like lack of education is doing advocacy as well has been very important for
Hmm.
them. Like there's different forms of a lot of the states have advocacy programs. We have the DC advocacy and writing letters to your
Hmm.
legislators and
Hmm.
like advocating for the needs of people. For a lot of people that's been really important in their recovery, and for caregivers just s like letting know what the needs are, but not just for yourself, for other people, and that
Yeah,
they find a lot of purpose in that.
yeah, definitely. You never know. You never know where your efforts will lead to or the impact of them. So, um, hopefully, this has been a useful discussion. Like I said, this is a something that I feel is at the core of recovery is finding that community. Not only kind of learning from others, but learning to give back to others as well is a big part of, I think, the recovery process. And like I said, I think it's important to be mindful of that. It's important to understand that it's your journey will be your journey. Like it's
Mhm.
going to be different from others, and that's how it should be, I guess, right? That's what works for folks. So um, hopefully that's been some helpful suggestions and ideas and information shared here. As always, if there's questions, you're looking for additional info, you are more than welcome to contact us through the National Brain Injury Information Center, 1-800 444 6443. Will reach us. Visit our website, www.biausa.org. Reach out to your state organization as well. Find out about kind of what resources and services and supports might be out there, and go see what might work for you. All right. I think we're done. I